All right, all right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast. We are your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. My name is Robert Winfrey, and I am your host. Thank you so much for listening. I deeply appreciate all of you guys. I say it all the time because it's true, and cultivating gratitude is profoundly helpful for your mental health and well-being. Is it stress? I think it's stress. The neurochemical reaction, the neurochemical release that causes stress cannot actually exist at the same time as genuine gratitude. So cultivating one of those actually reduces the other one from a again purely biochemical standpoint. So something worth considering maybe for you, any of you out there who might be struggling. Gratitude helps deal with your stress. It really does. All right, on the agenda this evening. Yesterday, UFC on ABC 7, prime time in Abu Dhabi. We had a card that was, you know what? It didn't suck. Really didn't suck. So I'll take that. I'll take that most of these days. Then we have a preview of a card that does suck. UFC on ESPN 61 is. Oof. You know, people have done the math on this, and heavyweights, I think it's like heavyweights and middleweights in particular, make up a disproportionately small percentage of the total UFC roster. I forget what exactly percentage of the roster is. If you just do it like middleweight, light heavyweight, and heavyweight, right? It's actually a small percentage of the roster, like 25 maybe? No, less than that. Between those three divisions. I forget the graph. It's small. It's not. It's a smaller percentage, but it has an outsized representation in main events. Like this small percentage of the roster accounts for like 50 plus percent of main events. And I think that I want to say that grows if we remove pay-per-views. If you take pay-per-view cards out of the equation, it goes much, much higher. And I say that because like that card is headlined by a heavyweight rematch that nobody remembers except maybe me. I mean, Caposa remembers that because he remembers everything. But like nobody really remembers the first one. It wasn't very good. And now we're getting a rematch, but it's heavyweights because who knows why. While the UFC is cutting talented flyweights. I think the big one this last week was like, hey, we're cutting Nate Maness. Like of all the flyweights you could cut, that guy's consistently exciting. And I might yell about it later, but ridiculous. So that card looks like it looks terrible. Just looks terrible. So then, whatever, a couple of minor points of news for the last week or so. Mostly, UFC 308 got its card reveal finally, so we'll talk a little bit about that. I think UFC 307 got fleshed out. They still desperately need a real main event for that card. I think right now what would headline is Raquel Pennington and I don't even remember Pena. God, that's a terrible fight. I'm gonna have to cover it. I might just check out before that fight. Oh, no, my integrity, my ethics wouldn't allow me to do that, but that fight sucks. It just sucks out loud. All right. So that's what's on the agenda here at the moment. Um, so any way you can interact with the show is always appreciated. Like, comment, subscribe, star rating, written review. You all know how to do any and all of that. All right, let's jump into this, shall we? UFC on ABC 7. First up, how did the predictions go? Well, very well, actually. 12 and 1. The only one I got wrong, I picked Victoria Dudikova to beat Sam Hughes. And Hughes won a split decision. I thought Hughes won the fight, for the record. But that was the only one. You know what struck me? I didn't track this. And it's because I don't. I don't need to add more stuff to my spreadsheet. Um, I don't, like, I don't need to color code it to where I'm tracking whether or not I'm picking underdogs or favorites and who wins underdogs or favorites. Like that's just people with more time and effort into tracking that stuff can do that. I'm just one guy and I got, a free copy of a spreadsheet. It's not even like Excel. Um, as Windows stuff costs money and I'm not gonna. And now they like charge you. Don't they have like a subscription doohickey because everybody does that nowadays? Yeah, I've got like there's free there's legitimately free versions that are very good of words and PowerPoint presentations and all that kind of stuff instead of having to deal with some Microsoft's BS. But I think Hughes was the only underdog to win yesterday. I can't say last night because it was in the morning, but if I slip up and say last night, just bear with me. I think she was the only underdog that cashed because Umar was favored, Shara Magomedov was favored, Davison Figueiredo was favored, Michael Chiesa was favored, Mackenzie Dern was favored, Joel Alvarez was favored. If there was that one was close on paper, but I think he was the favorite. If there was no Mirzakhanov was the favorite. Mirzakhanov, yeah, he was. Fernandez was the favorite. Gaziv was the favorite. Kutateladze was the favorite. Dudakova was the favorite and lost. Herbert, 90% sure. Let me check real quick. That was the second fight. Because Cedricus Dumas was the favorite. Herbert, yeah, Herbert was a little bit of a favorite over Bedoya. It was a close one. So let me confirm. Sorry, I did that off the top of my head, so just give me half a second here. So Herbert favorite. Hughes underdog. Knew that one. Let's see. Kutateladze was the favorite. Vucenic, he made us sweat that one a little bit. We'll talk about the fight when we get to it. Yeah, Gaziv was the favorite. Fernandez was a fairly sizable favorite, actually. Mirzakhanov, yeah, that was the other one that the first time I looked up those when I was writing my blurbs, I think Menafield was a favorite. By the time it closed, Mirzakhanov was a non-trivial favorite, it's like minus 240, minus 250, something like that. Kind of depending on where you're looking. Let's see. Then, yeah, Alvarez was a slight favorite over Brenner. Dern was a favorite over Godinez. And that was also close, but Dern favored. Let's see. Chiesa was I think Michael Chiesa was the biggest favorite on the card, which is not surprising, all things considered. Then, yeah, Figueiredo was favored over Vera. That was the other one that I'd seen a little bit. I'd seen those odds go back and forth just a little bit, but Figueiredo was favored. Yeah, Shara Magomedov was fairly heavily favored. And then Umar, surprisingly heavy favorite was Umar Nurmagomedov. I had no problem picking him. Well, I mean, I shouldn't have had no problem. Because I actually went back and forth on that one a little bit. But however much I was like, okay, picking him at the end, I did not think he was almost a four. He should have been almost a 4-1 favorite. Like the odds for that one didn't quite line up. Um, yeah, so I picked every favorite on that card. I don't know that I do that very regularly, and I don't know how I feel about that. I don't know. I mean, then again, a few of those were close on paper, so it's not like I was out here going, Oh, I've foreseen the future, and it's this minus 1200 favorite. Like, but it's actually kind of rare in the UFC that you don't have more underdogs cash. Like only one dog. Hang on. If I was so apart, if I had done the thing where like, okay, pick one underdog on this card, who would I have picked? Because I don't think I would have picked Hughes. Is kind of where I'm going with that. So yeah, didn't realize I'd only picked favorites, but I don't know. It made sense. Sometimes when I pick the underdog, I'm not saying I always pick it right, but when I pick an underdog, I like to think that it makes sense to me why I'm making that pick. And there were just, I mean, Sandhagen and Umar was just a really good fight. Other than that, who would I have singled out as like, again, a good under? I said Oleksiejczuk had a decent enough shot at beating Magomedov. Vera and Figgy was just a well matched fight. So Vera might have been an underdog. Godinez, maybe? Maybe Godinez on an outside shot. Yeah, long and the short of that, Hughes would not have been like in my top three, like pick an underdog. She probably would have been top five though. There's a bunch of those people I would not have picked, before saying that okay, find her as your upset pick. But so yeah, 12-1, 12-1, just straight picking the favorites. Year to date, that brings me to 219 and 98 with 4 no contests. So yeah, that's the best I've done. Is that technically my best ever? There was one. I went 12-2 at UFC 299. Hmm. A few of these other 13ers, I've only done okay on. The 14 fight cards are kind of killing me. Jeez. I mean, I'm positive on all of them, but not by like big numbers. Yeah, I'll say 12. That's the least I've ever got wrong. Put it that way. That's the least I've ever picked incorrectly. Got a few other twos. Got quite a few twos, actually. But that's my first one. It's my first only singular. And statistically speaking, if I just do this enough, I'll get one right top to bottom at some point. But I don't. That's only over a long enough timeline. I don't expect that to happen. So I do this over a long enough timeline, I'm going to get 100% of them wrong too. So there's that. Yeah, doing okay. Doing okay in the old prediction space thus far. All right, let's move on to the fights themselves, shall we? Because not a bad night of fights, being honest. Main event: Umar Nurmagomedov defeats Corey Sandhagen, unanimous decision, 150-45. Yeah, I don't agree with that. 249-46. That's what I had. I gave Sandhagen the first round actually. Um, but after that, man, Sandhagen's offense just really struggled to come to life. And I've been looking into kind of why, like what was going, because this was a good fight. This was not your fight of the night, which I can understand. Uh, they when they give that out, they tend to favor yay action versus really interesting stuff. Um, this I don't know if this is going on my fight of the year. It might. It'll probably go as a potential, I think. Been a couple of events since I've added anything to any of my like year-end award lists. But that one might. That might go on there. Some really good scrambles, actually. Umar hit a really nice limp arm at one point. Was in on a kind of a single leg, more of a high crotch, but single leg. Sandhagen defending. Umar switches his head, gets around behind. Really nice. Um, hit a lot of pullbacks. I don't know if that's the correct term, but some guys might call it a suckback. I think that's one of those terminologies that will switch depending on which sub-school of wrestling you're talking about at any given point of time. So, but it's where if you've got the back standing, so a rear waist lock kind of thing, or a tight waist again, depending on who you're talking to, and you just kind of pull backwards and you sit down and you drag them all the way back. It's not actually a very common move in MMA. Some guys do it. It's more common in I think Sambo does it. It came out of it gained some popularity in the Russian amateur wrestling scene. The problem that you have with MMA with doing it, your hips are lower than the other guys, right? We're pulling down and back, pulling them off balance. You're pulling them on top of you, but because of how you have to get your weight down and to block one of the legs, because otherwise they can kind of just step backwards and stay upright, you got to block one of the legs. Their hips wind up higher than yours, and you can't really take someone's back if your hips are below theirs. In fact, I don't even know if jiu-jitsu actually has a name. I mean, I'm sure they do, but most jiu-jitsu places, scoring criteria, even schools, like you got to get your hips have to be above their hips to really have the back, because that's how you gain control. But what you do with this one is you pull them backwards, and if they're off balance or they're not ready, you can pull them straight into your lap and get to that position. But more often what you wind up doing is, and this is a folk style wrestling terminology more than freestyle, you pull them into a crab ride, which is not nearly as good for control. I mean, if you know what you're doing and they're a little bit befuddled by the position, you can do some great stuff with it. But in general, that's a very transitional place. You don't usually see guys spend a lot of time in a crab ride. There's other rides that's a little bit more common. Well, you can ride out the clock or whatnot, because again, folk style wrestling. Back when riding time was a more important part of the scoring criteria. Um, but Umar would hit that on Sandhagen a few times, and Sandhagen, I gotta give both guys credit for this. So there's two things Sandhagen did really well. Anytime he wound up in that position, he would show his back to regain his feet on the occasions he did get taken down. He almost never conceded position. So I think at the end of the fifth round, he kind of, he was doing stuff off of his back, but he wasn't actively trying to scramble up the way he had before. But anytime, if he would get to his knees, he would then pretty quickly Granby roll, timing that a little bit with Umar trying to go to a specific ride. I'm not going to go into all the details of which ride because I can't always remember them. I can't always keep them straight, so we're just going with a ride position, which is my terminology is my catch-all term for some variation of the referee's position in amateur wrestling, and so just go with me on that. There's a million different names, all of which make sense if you have to call them out in a wrestling scenario, but are too much of a pain for me to go through in casual conversation. But anytime, so he'd try to Granby roll through that. Umar would roll with him. He was kind of expecting it. But Sandhagen was really good about blocking the hooks from going in. And someone less skilled than Umar Nurmagomedov, I think, would have lost control a lot more readily. Umar's ability and familiarity with how to use the crab ride, or some variations on it, actually stopped Sandhagen from fully escaping a few different times, or being able to mount, a leg attack, or even just getting away faster than he did. So the way that interaction in particular played out for both of them actually spoke very well of both guys' abilities. So my hat's off to that one. Um, Striking was relatively even. Umar's lead leg is stupidly fast, and very dexterous. As a guy with kind of messed up hips, I am jealous of his leg dexterity. Uh, my kicks are not nearly that pretty, and um, strengthening the appropriate muscles and then finding how messed up are your hips? Have you have you been to a chiropractor recently and had that adjusted? Because sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's just the angle because whole bunch of things. I'm jealous of his lead leg. It's very fast and it's actually pretty useful. He got in some body kicks to try and maintain distance. Sandhagen's offensive output was a little bit muted relative to a lot of some of his previous performances. And naturally, there's a segment of the online populace that is now decrying Trevor Whitman as having, ruined Corey Sandhagen. Guys, that is doing Umar Nurmagomedov a comical disservice. Sandhagen's offense was muted because Umar was there to throw with him and constantly threaten him if he overcommitted on his strikes. This is actually the benefit of a style like Umar Nurmagomedov's. The fact that it exists and he has demonstrated its efficacy and his uh, mastery of that style in the past influences every little thing you do when you fight him. Even if he fights you completely differently for long stretches of time, you never get away from what you're doing because he can always go back to that. If you open up on that guy too much, he's on your hips in a heartbeat. Probably even faster. Just instantly will get in there. So everything you do has to be built around that. The knowledge that he can and will do that. And then if he doesn't have to do that as relentlessly, then the point there is like you still can't stop building a lot of what you're doing around that because he hasn't done it yet, because as soon as you get away from what you're doing that might negate some of his game, he's going to switch it up on you. So why didn't Corey throw more punches? Well, one, he's getting kind of punched with on occasion by Umar. Two, if he overcommits, he's going to get taken down. Well, but Umar didn't shoot that much, partially because Sandhagen didn't overcommit on his strikes. Like you have to understand the balance of that. You can't be an offensive machine gun against someone like Umar Nurmagomedov. Uh, you have to build your game differently for that fight. And it didn't quite it didn't quite pan out this time. But the notion that one of the better coaches in the sport has suddenly turned Corey Sandhagen into a low activity guy, like, no, he was lower activity here because of Umar Nurmagomedov. I mean, Sandhagen didn't have a low output when he fought Vera. He didn't have a low output when he fought Rob Font. This There's way too much logical leaping because I guess now we're into like anti-Trevor Whitman somewhere on the internet. Just really weird. Please don't do that. Don't be that guy. This was just always going to be a tough fight, and trying to be nothing but a buzzsaw offensively was not going to work out. Um, that said, there's a little bit of offensive activity that maybe could have been picked up. Might sound weird considering everything I just said, but if there was a question around Umar coming into this fight, it was how's he going to do at 5 rounds? Because he'd never been in a 5-round fight before. And Sandhagen fought TJ Dillashaw for 5 rounds and should have won that fight. That is a hill I will absolutely die on. And the pace at which this was contested offensively didn't, I shouldn't say it didn't, push Umar cardiovascularly because these two fought at a decent clip. Especially when you consider all the little tactical things that are going on minute to minute. That is strenuous and very stressful. But by and large, this was a pace that you knew Umar could sustain for 5 rounds. And Sandhagen couldn't quite thread the needle between not opening up too much and letting Umar either counter him or go to his like A plan, and pushing enough of a pace to really maybe tax Umar's faculties in ways that he's just not familiar with. That's a really fine needle to thread. So I don't blame the guy for not necessarily being able to find that, but if for whatever my opinion on that is worth, and maybe it's nothing. But that as a real minor thing. But the distance management from both guys was kind of on point. There was a really awkward bit of commentary when going into the fourth. Whitman said to Sandhagen, like between rounds, you got to do a better job of controlling his feet. Now, there's not a lot of grappling going on there, and he wasn't talking about like what do you do to block hooks or anything like that. It was striking stuff. And John Gooden, trying to facilitate commentary, brings up to his other commentators, Paul Felder and Daniel Cormier, asks what does he mean by that. Now, John Gooden probably has a decent enough idea what he means by that, but he's trying to get the knowledgeable guys to engage in meaningful commentary rather than just jokingly podcasting, which is most of what Daniel Cormier does. But he asks, like, so what does he mean by that? And there's this, like, stretch of silence. I don't know if Cormier and Felder were both like, is he going to take this one? Or if they didn't know, and the best they could come up with at the end of it was, well, they're fighting in opposite stances, which is true. And you want to get outside foot position, and what a lame answer. I mean, don't get me wrong. Understanding how to control someone's footwork, that is super. Well, okay. The premise of controlling your opponent's feet and mobility with your mobility and your fakes and your feints and whatnot, as a general concept, is not super high level. The idea that this is what you have to do. That's not beginner stuff, but that's more intermediate, right? If you have that's the kind of thing you should be figuring out into your amateur career, like hypothetically, right? If you have an amateur career in boxing or whatnot, you should be figuring out how to control your opponent's feet and their ring position and whatnot. That's not day one stuff, but that's not necessarily in basic, because everything has like basics and advanced applications. The basics of controlling your opponent's feet is not basic, but it's not like trade secrets, right? This isn't under lock and key stuff. It's hard to do, and it's not the easiest thing in the world to talk about all the time because there's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot of shoulder feinting that goes into it. What's your upper body doing? How do you steer them around the cage? Which is a lot of what's being talked about here. Control his feet, control where he's going, control how he goes there. And doing that with your footwork and your fakes and your feints is not easy. And it's just my what made me so annoyed by it, I think, was just you defaulted to, well, you want outside foot position. That is that is like day one beginner stuff. Get outside foot position if you're open stances. And frankly, that's one of those rules that's not written in stone. That's a rule of thumb, first of all. And second, that's such a loose guideline rather than rule that people break it all the time for very deliberate reasons. It's it, defaulting to that answer was just a little bit disappointing. And the fact that, I mean, that was also one of the things that Sandhagen really struggled with was controlling the movement. Umar, to his credit, was not really like just circling. Certainly not always to the same direction. You always tend to circle predominantly one direction, but moving back and forth is what opens up a lot of stuff. But he couldn't really have a lot of control over the directions that Umar was taking. Um, yeah, this was a good fight. Um, Very good win for Umar Nurmagomedov, still undefeated. Said he wants to fight for the belt next, and I've got a really hard time imagining somebody else getting ahead of him. Um, just beat the number 2 contender by the UFC's rankings, undefeated, and yeah, I mean, whether that's O'Malley or Merab, um, he's probably next, and frankly, I think Umar's going to wear that belt. He is he is an exceptional talent, that man. There's still a few questions about him. Um, he got hit and rocked actually in his previous bout, which was a return from shoulder injury against a debutant, which was a little bit of an odd matchmaking. And he still came back and like won that round and ultimately dropped like 2 other 10-8s on the guy. And coming back to win a round after you get dropped is nothing to sneeze at. So there's a little bit of a question there. There's a question about a higher paced fight, how he might do over the long haul. But on the whole, really good performance from him here, and that man is probably going to wear gold. That's very, very likely. Tough loss for Sandhagen. I don't know who he fights next. Um, he might get the loser of Merab and O'Malley, depending on how that fight goes in particular. Because there was another bantamweight fight on this main card, and we'll get to it in a minute or two, but I have a different idea for that fight. But Sandhagen's fought a lot of the top guys in this weight class already. So there's a few options still, though. Got announced that Mario Bautista and Jose Aldo are going to fight. He might fight the winner of that. Depends on how far he drops. But I would give serious consideration to loser of O'Malley and Merab to be his next fight. That would be a very serious consideration for me. So that was your main event. Good fight. Especially if you really like getting into some of the small technical stuff. Very good stuff there from both guys. Co-main event, Shara Magomedov defeated Michal Oleksiejczuk via unanimous decision, 2:30-27 to 29-28. I was 29-28. Actually gave Oleksiejczuk the first round. He dropped Magomedov fairly early, and Magomedov rebounded well enough, and it was certainly did okay for the rest of the round. But I don't think he overcame that deficit. My opinion. 2 and 3, Magomedov won. Not walking away might be a bit much, but handily. He's got good kicks. He's got good for as many kicks as that guy throws. He's got good cardio, especially for a guy his size. Middleweight, there's some very large middleweights. Um, so he did that okay. His wrestling is still a bit of an issue. Off of his back, he's still not much other than like throwing elbows. But they're matchmaking him in such a way that he's not really being consistently tested in that area. Uh, he got a win. This was your fight of the night. I Not where I would have gone. I would have gone either. I might have gone Nurmagomedov and Sandhagen because I'm me. If I wasn't gonna go with that one, I would have gone Guram Kutateladze and Jordan Vucenic. Vucenic, sorry, because it rhymes with epidemic. So Vucenic. Yeah, Vucenic. Vucenic. There's a CH there. Okay. I would have gone with Kutateladze and Vucenic, personally. That was my fight of the night, not this one. Again, it was fine enough. Bantamweights, Davison Figueiredo beats Marlon Vera via unanimous decision, 2:29-28 and a 30-27. Figueiredo at bantamweight. I said this after his last one, but I'm gonna repeat it again. This dude's a legitimate player in the weight class, which, considering his relative age, I mean he's 36, and 36 at lightweight and lower is like good luck. He's a little. I said this before. He's a little undersized, but not as much as I think a lot of us thought he would be when he first made that move up. He's a smaller bantamweight, but he's not. He's not a guy who you look at and go, he shouldn't be in the weight class. His power is still there. In fact, he dropped Vera, which little bit good timing, little bit just power because man, O'Malley with all the abuse he threw at Cheeto Vera couldn't drop him, and Figgy did. He's integrated his grappling a lot more in this weight class, which I think I talked about after his last win. Like that's a good idea for him. He's a good grappler, and adding that to be a bit more of his identity as a bantamweight fighter, whereas it was a little bit too energy demanding at flyweight after his weight cuts. Um, really good way to kind of reinvent your game. He said he wants a title shot next. I don't think he'll get that. Not over Nurmagomedov. I saw the idea floated online, and I'm going to echo it here. Davison Figueiredo and Petr Yan. I think that may have been one that was like loosely floated after he beat Rob Font. Reiterating that now more than ever, because Vera was, they were both, I think, top 10 ranked. Figueiredo and Petr Yan, if we can swing that, yes, please. Or Figueiredo and Sandhagen wouldn't be the worst thing in the world either. Just throwing that out there. Not the worst thing in the world. Good fight from Figueiredo. His bantamweight, career renaissance. Renaissance would imply a bit too much more of a decline at flyweight than I think he had. But in general, the resurgence and reinvention, genuinely admirable. Genuinely. A good win for him. Michael Chiesa choked out Tony Ferguson with a rear naked choke, 3:44 of the first. Tony Ferguson now holds the longest losing streak in UFC history at 8, surpassing BJ Penn. He does not have the longest winless streak, though. Believe it or not, that stands at, I believe, 11. Let me double check, because I know who holds it. You see, that record is held by Sam Alvey. And, oh no, only 9. Okay. I thought it was more than that. Only 9. You see, he had a, what, 4-fight losing streak, then a split draw with Da Jung, then then another 4-fight losing streak, and then the UFC finally bid him adieu. Now he's in Karate Combat as one of their champions. How do you do? I actually don't dislike Karate Combat. Let me preface what I'm about to say with that. I don't dislike the organization. I don't hate the rule set. Um, but if one of your champions is almost 40-year-old, dude is like my age. Almost 40-year-old Sam Alvey. Um, that's that's a bit of an indictment on your roster. Just gonna throw that out there. Um, anyway, so after the fight, this went about like you'd expect. They circled a bit. Eventually, they tied up. Kiesa got the back standing, pulled things down, got the back, got the choke. Had to fight to adjust the choke a little bit, but got it in. After the fight, Tony Ferguson did the most Tony Ferguson thing ever, and I say that with respect. Took the gloves off, put one glove down, said, I love the UFC. I don't want to fight anywhere else, but I don't know what's going to happen. So I'm only putting one glove down. I'm going to talk things over with my family and my team and whatnot, and thank y'all. And got some decent love for the crowd, which he deserves. Then, like, before he even completes his walk to the back, so the UFC, like, they released, some of that footage of, following the guy to the back. Like, before he even gets all the way to the back, it throws the other glove into the stands. Like, no, I got stuff to work on. I'm not going. I don't want. I just, man, Tony Ferguson was one of my favorite fighters for a long time. Um, he was the boogeyman of the lightweight division. There's people who might have come into this sport and have only since he started losing, which is weird to think about, but it's true. He used to butcher people. I mean that, like he changed you in some very real ways. Like he carved you up. You got out of that guy with scars and your face messed up. There's a kind of a famous collage that floats around on occasion. Like this is what Tony Ferguson does to people. And it's like cowboy with one of his eyes swollen shut, and Anthony Pettis all bruised up, and who else was in that streak actually? Yeah, because again, it's kind of famous. I just can't remember off the top of my head. Because he didn't tear up Rafael dos Anjos. Oh yeah, Barboza and Josh Thompson, both of them just covered in blood. Lando Venata. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong. Kevin Lee actually a little bit. There's just because I think RDA was like the only guy that didn't just get completely carved up. But they picked. Oh, I think the Kakuno one is in there because he knocked Katsunori Kakuno out. But yeah, just this collage of like very good fighters after Tony was done with them, and it was beautiful. If you like the violence, and I do. It's beautiful stuff, and I don't know, man. I have begun to worry for him a little bit. Maybe this is, unfounded or overstepping, but he's hanging on to this like a guy who doesn't know what to do without it. And that's a scary place for anyone to be, especially as your career winds down. And that's not just true of that's true of boxers, of MMA fighters, of professional wrestlers, a lot of different things like that. If you don't have anything else, you hang on too tight, and I hope I'm wrong. I really hope I'm wrong about that. Strawweight Mackenzie Dern defeated Lupe Godinez via unanimous decision, 29-28 across the boards. Um, yeah, 1-3 to Dern. Not very interesting striking from either woman. Dern's entries into her combinations are okay, but man, she exits those exchanges, either doesn't and just kind of stands there and gets countered, or just exits with her hands down and her head a little bit too high up, and she would keep getting tagged on the way out of, like, I enter, I throw my 3 punches, and then my exit is just very poor or very slow, and some counterpunch from Lupe would hit her. They hit the ground a few times, and Dern on the ground is very, very good. She almost got an armbar in the first round, then had enough groundwork in the second to win a decision. Her ground and pound still needs work. Like, it would bring so much of her submission threat to life to just be able to make people move in disadvantageous ways by threatening them with violence, which is kind of the point of ground and pound as it integrates with your submissions. But lightweights, this was actually a good fight too. Joel Alvarez and Elvis Brenner. Alvarez, he's real good. I've kind of been hip to him for a little bit. Both guys actually fought well, but the length of Alvarez, Brenner never really found a reliable answer to it. Some nice body work from Alvarez. Then in the third, he kind of clocks him with, I think it was a left hook. And then this barrage of knees, like he would just kind of tie up, grab, initially it was a double collar tie, and just knee after knee after knee after knee after knee, and then Brenner kind of got away and then tied up again, and this time it was from kind of a front headlock. I call it more of like a head and arm wrap from the front, but still just held him there, knees until Brenner just kind of dropped down. Really good stuff. Really good stuff from Joel Alvarez. And Brenner, to his credit, fought very well. Had a tough first round and then actually rebounded. Came back in the second and did some pretty good work. The second round, a lot of Alvarez's offense, his volume diminished a bit, and it let Brenner kind of fight his way back into it. Pretty good fight there. That was your main card. Prelims, Azamat Mirzakhanov defeated Alonzo Menafield via knockout punches, 3:18 of the second. Pretty much all Mirzakhanov in the first round. He starts slowing in the second. Not that Menafield is in great shape, but Menafield was like, okay, you're really slowing and getting tired. And Mirzakhanov faster, a little bit better ring position, landed fairly consistently on Menafield. And then second round, like, you could see he was getting tired, kind of going, okay, may as well start swinging and banging a little bit if I'm going to be tired anyway. And connected with a couple of punches to drop Menafield. Solid enough finish. Kaue Fernandez defeated Muhammad Yahya via TKO punches, 4:44 of the first. Fernandez looked good. I mean, he lost his UFC debut, but he fought pretty darn well in it. Here, he mangled Yahya's left calf. And Yahya got more and more desperate, then tries to lunge in from southpaw with a body kick, drops his hands as he kicks, and Fernandez intercepts him with a 1-2. They were open stances at that point. 1-2, drops him, a few more punches on the mat. This is the kind of rebound you want to have if you lose your especially if you lose your UFC debut in a fight where you do okay. Demonstrate that that's not a fluke. Fernandez definitely did that here. Shamil Gaziev defeated Dontel Mays via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the board. This fight sucked. I actually got to take a break during one of the rounds because Gaziev just got kind of a body lock and a clinch and ran forward, bit of an outside trip, land in half guard, and we're just going to spend 3.5 minutes from here now because Mays can't get up and I can't pass. And I actually wound up giving my one of the cats, my brother's out for the moment. Just take some minor medication, so I I knew as soon as that takedown happened, go get the cat, give the cat his pills, force him to swallow them. You got plenty of time here because nothing's gonna happen for the next Yeah, that fight actually is going to go on my worst of the list. Worst year of the list. I need to update that after this. My favorite fight of the evening, Guram Kutateladze defeated Jordan Vucenic via unanimous decision, 29-28 across the boards. Vucenic has a really good first round. Fast hands, good power. Um, then does a little bit more of that in the second, to like first half of the second round. He's still winning. Then Kutateladze kind of wakes up after that point, cracks him with a few elbows, cuts him. In the third round, Kutateladze just finally like really got going. Spent a lot of time in back control in the third round. So my hats off to both guys. Vucenic for a short notice step up really did a good job. And Kutateladze overcoming a really tough deficit. Like you drop that first round in MMA, it can be really hard to get back. He did. I mean, he even overcame again struggling in the second, especially as it started. So good fight from both guys. Thumbs up for me. Sam Hughes defeats Victoria Dudakova via split decision. There's a 30-27 for Dudakova. That is, no. Then two 29-28s for Hughes. First round Dudakova. Second round Hughes. Third, I gave it to Hughes. If you wanted to give the third to Dudakova, I think that's somewhat defensible. The second round going to her is not. Mediocre women's fight. Big thing about this one, Dudakova in the back half of the first started doing some body work, including like a serious barrage of knees from the clinch, and then just never went back to the body reliably after that, which was really an odd decision. Hughes did not like that body work, and I don't know if Dudakova just didn't recognize it or was never able to really recapitalize on it, but that was an avenue that I think victory was possible for her if she'd pursued it. Jai Herbert defeated Rolando Bedoya via unanimous decision, 230-27 to 29-28. Fun enough little fight here. Bedoya's tough, but he struggled to find a lot to really get things going against Herbert. Good movement, good length, good distance control. Really nice jab from Herbert in this one. And kicking everything off, Cedricus Dumas defeated Dennis Tululin via unanimous decision, a 30-27 and two 29-28s. Not a good fight. Don't have a whole lot to say there. All right. Because I don't. Geez, I've already been here for an hour. Your bonus says, I mentioned already, fight of the night was Magomedov and Alexejczyk, not where I would have thrown that money. Performances went to Joel Alvarez and Azamat Murzakanov. Yeah. I mean, I went through the list. Like, there were only 4 finishes, right? You had Chiesa, Alvarez, Murzakanov, and Fernandez. And since they like to throw those at finishes, Chiesa would be the odd man out there. Choosing between the other 3, yeah. As long as it was 2 of those other 3, I don't think I can complain too much. But yeah, that was the card. So full report, MMAZone411mania.com. Y'all know the drill there, so give it a read if you're so inclined. And anyone that did read my live coverage or followed along with that, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Okay, let me fix that real fast. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So let's talk about this terrible card, shall we? UFC on ESPN 61. Oh, your main event, a rematch, because who wanted this? I mean, look, I'm not going to sit here and get up in arms over some other fight on this card getting kind of screwed out of a main event spot, because I don't know that. I mean, we're going to go through it, so I'll have a better idea in a minute or two, but I don't know anyone that is all that interested in your main event of Marcin Tybura and Sergey Spivak 2. I mean, these two fought in 2020 February 2020, so before the pandemic. Tabora wins a unanimous decision at that point. But I mean, these are just like mediocre heavyweights. Sergey Spivak's been out of action for almost a year. I mean, the last time he was out there, he got kind of ran over by Cyril Gahn. His 2 wins before that were 3 wins, excuse me, Greg Hardy, Augusto Sakai, and Derek Lewis. Tom Aspinall beat him before that. I mean, he's not losing to scrubs. Let me give Spivak his due here. Lost his UFC debut to Walt Harris in 50 seconds. That's rough. Then loses to Tabora, wins 3 in a row, loses to Tom Aspinall, and oh, the horror of losing to arguably the best heavyweight MMA fighter in the world. Wins 3 in a row and then loses to Cyril Gahn. And Gahn is one of the better guys in the UFC. The question is, like, has Spivak improved enough to beat Tabora by this point? Because Tabora is kind of the same guy. I say kind of. Odds on this one are real close. Most places are leaning Spivak ever so slightly. Spivak's only 29. Tabora's 38. These guys have 9 years apart. Yeah, Tabora also pretty much my age. Jeez, I feel old. If this were 3 rounds, I'd pick Tabora again, believe it or not. If again, 3-round fight, I think Tabora still has it in him to win 2 rounds, and then even if he loses a third, just win 2 of the 3 rounds and not get finished. 5 rounds, on the other hand, 5 rounds is a little tougher. Let me go with Spivak. I'm going to reserve the right to change my mind on that one. But for the moment, let's go with Spivak. Co-main event, Chris Gutierrez and Javid Basharat. This is not a terrible fight. I actually think decently of Chris Gutierrez. He's had some tough setbacks. But he had a nice long winning streak. I mean, his UFC debut was a loss to Hani Barcelos in 18. Went on a long streak without a loss. He did have one draw in there with Cody Durden. But he didn't lose until he fought Pedro Munoz. Then he beat Alatong Hele. He's coming off a loss to Song Yadong, but Chris Gutierrez is pretty darn good. And Basharat, coming off of a loss to Ayman Zahabi, he was supposed to win that fight. I mean, by any metric. I think I'm going to... The odds are fairly heavily with Basharat, which I find surprising. Not surprising in the sense that, Basharat is some scrub. I don't think he's that at all, but... Like, Gutierrez is actually better than Ayman Zahabi. That loss to Song is kind of looming large for a lot of people, I imagine. I'm actually going to go with Gutierrez here. That 1 hour or 2. 2 hours, okay. I'm actually going with Gutierrez. I'm not some Basharat hater, but he really struggled against Ayman Zahabi in ways that were surprising. Now, he could easily remedy those problems, and Gutierrez might wind up being just a really good stylistic matchup for Basharat, but I actually like Gutierrez, so I'm going to go with him. And yeah, I cooled on. It's not that Basharat had a loss. It's really not. The way that Victor Henry fight went too, like he'd won the first round, but Henry was actually starting to figure some stuff out. And then, so you have that one that went to a no contest, and then you follow that up with a really weird performance against Ayman Zahabi, and I've cooled on Javed Basharat a little bit. Next up, featherweights, we have Chepe Mariscal and Damon Jackson. This is actually a pretty fun fight. Jackson, 35. Coming off a split decision win over Alexander Hernandez. I agreed with him winning that, I seem to recall. He'd lost two in a row before that to Dan Ige and Billy Quarantillo. Mariscal's actually been pretty good in the UFC. 3-0. Had that win over Trevor Peek. That was like the most entertaining parking lot fight you'll ever see. Then moved back down to featherweight and beat both Jack Jenkins. That was an arm injury, but that was actually a competitive fight before the arm injury. I mean, it was back half of round two, so things were still developing. And then a split decision over Morgan Charrier. I think I scored that for Chepe. So that's a good fight. Long and the short of it. That's a pretty darn good fight, actually. I'm gonna go with. Actually, I am gonna go with Mariscal. I'm not. Jackson is very capable of winning that. Just kind of feels like he's a little bit more Jackson in like the elder statesman phase of his career, which happens to a lot of guys in these weight classes once they hit 35. And I think Mariscal might be a little bit more on the come up. But that's a good fight. That's a really good fight. Let's see. We have women's bantamweight action next. Yana Santos and Chelsea Chandler. Who cares? Chelsea Chandler is just. She had a good enough win when she beat Yulia Stoliarenko, then performed very poorly against Norma Dumont. I then missed weight when she fought Josiane Nunez and didn't actually perform all that well. Yana Santos, the former Yana Kunitskaya, on a 3-fight losing streak. The loss to Carol Hossa was a split decision, and the other two losses, I mean, Irene Aldana and then Holly Holm, okay. And Aldana missed weight for their fight pretty badly, actually. I mean, Aldana weighed 139 and a half. Jeez. I just have not been very impressed with Chandler. I'm going with Santos. But that's not a fight I'd bet on. If you want to have a bet around, if you want to gamble on that fight, only gamble on it going the distance. Don't even bet on the winner. But, women's fights go in the distance. It's like collecting interest. You're never going to get like huge payouts, but more often than not, you'll collect a little bit of interest. And kicking off the main card, we have Alan Nascimento and Jafel Filho. This is another okay fight, actually. Two flyweights. Nascimento 20-6. 2-1 in the UFC. Lost his debut to Tagir Ulanbekov, but that was a good fight. Wins over Jake Hadley and Carlos Hernandez since then. Had two fights fall out this year because Hernandez was back in January. Lost out on fights to both Tim Elliott and Sumu Darji since then. Yeah, that's a little bit of a... Oh, no, those were last year. Sorry, he's been out of action for a bit because Hernandez was January of 23. My mistake, I misread that. Then, yeah, 23, he lost. Again, fights fell through with Tim Elliott and Sumu Darji, and then this is his first scheduled fight all year. Sheesh. Filho, 16-3. 2-fight winning streak, 2-1 in the UFC. Lost his debut to Muhammad Makayev. He gave Makayev problems. I remember that fight. Uh, won his last two over Daniel Barres and O'Day Osborne. Um, I actually kind of like Filio here. Not by the biggest amount, but odds are fairly heavily with Nascimento, really. Hmm. I'm still gonna stick with Filio. Uh, let me asterisk this one. I am, but I need to watch like each of their last fights because I'm going off of memory, and I've seen a lot of fights, so some of that just kind of runs together. On the prelims, we have Toshiomi Kazama and Charalampus Gregorio. Wow. Japanese names and Greek names at the same time in the same fight. And that's a bit of a thing. The odds like Gregorio. Okay, I don't think that's unfair. Oh, is he from Cyprus? Cyprus instead of Greece proper. Okay, my apologies, sir. He's 8-4. Lost his UFC debut to Chad Henniger. He got some hype coming off of his Contender Series win. He is dangerous. Kazama is 10-4. Two-fight losing streak. What, 0-2 in the UFC? Yeah, losses to Rinya Nakamura and then Garrett Armfield. Both in the first round. Okay, I see what's up here. I don't mean that unkindly, but I kind of see what's going on here. Okay. I certainly understand why the odds are where they are. And I think I'll respect there. I'll respect the odds. Igoriou. I'll go with Gregorio. Sure I spelled that right. Grigoriou. Yep. Okay. Yeah, I'll go along with that. Gregorio very dangerous, especially in the first round. Let's see. Next up, Johnny Parsons and Yusaku Kinoshita. I want to say I should go with Kinoshita here. Odds are with Parsons. Let me double check a couple of things here. Where are you two? Did this fall apart? This might have fallen apart. Let me check something real fast on each guy. Oh no, Johnny Parsons is the slugger knot. Okay. Okay, I remember you, sir. Yeah, he knocked out Danny Roberts in his UFC debut. I think up a weight class. Okay. Yeah, he's had two canceled fights on this card apparently. There's no way that's right. Unless he was supposed to fight Uros Medic. Yeah, why is that listed? It would be welterweight actually. Now that I think about it. Okay. Uh, Kinoshita's what? 6-3. Two-fight losing streak. 0-2 in the UFC. Adam Fugit and Billy Goff. Yeah, fight with Danny Barlow fall through, and then again. Okay, so if this one happens, I'm gonna throw a question mark on that one because that might just be. Tapology's normally pretty hip to this, whereas a few other sites like take a while to update. But I will go with Parsons on that one. He was surprisingly impressive in that UFC. I I did not expect him to do that well against Danny Roberts, but he definitely over-delivered there. So, okay, quick look through this. Yeah, I don't know why one of those is listed weirdly. That Parsons one, that fight might be off, but for some reason it was listed as Johnny Parsons and Uroš Medic at some point, but Medic was supposed to fight Danny Barlow. Medic pulled out with a rib injury. In for him steps Nikolai. Okay, this guy's from Kazakhstan. Give me just a minute to try and figure this one out. Oh, Veretnikov? Veretenikov? I don't know where the accent would be. I'm gonna go. Okay, I'm going to apologize. I'm going with Veretenikov until I hear otherwise. So Veretenikov is 12-4, 3-fight winning streak. Came up short in a contender series bout a while back. 3-0 since then. Okay. Barlow 8-0. So undefeated. Had a good winning streak over UFC debut rather, excuse me, over Josh Quinlan. Do kind of remember that fight. Okay. Probably leads me to think I should pick Barlow here, based on currently available information. Do you have odds on this one? Yes, there you are. Yeah, the odds are, okay, let me go with Barlow then. With the usual caveat that some of those, especially like uh, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, like that, some of those guys from that part of the world are just animals. And so, as a disclaimer there, I have zero confidence in that pick. Women's bantamweight next, Carol Hossa and Pani Kianzad. Feels like Kianzad. Hossa coming off a loss to Irene Aldana. Only UFC losses are to Sarah McMahon, Norma Dumont, and then Irene Aldana. Kianzad been a bit up and down. 1-3 in her last 4 losses. She lost to Raquel Pennington. That fight sucked. Beat Lena Landsberg, lost to Ketlin Vieira. That fight also wasn't good. And then Macy Chasson kind of ran through her not too long ago. Hossa's a decent enough fighter. Yeah, let me go with Hossa. Okay, so that one's Hossa. Heavyweights. Why? Jonata Diaz and Carl Williams. So, Denise? Can't remember how to pronounce that gentleman's last name. 7-0, 1-0 in the UFC. Beat Austin Lane, who should not be in the UFC. Williams fights out of the Virgin Islands. Well, he's from the Virgin Islands. 10-1, 3-fight winning streak in the UFC. Tough wrestler. Tough wrestler. And that's been kind of his rap for a little bit. Wins over in the UFC over Łukasz Dreszki, Chase Sherman, and Justin Taffa. Williams is never going to be like anyone's favorite fighter, but Curtis Blades is about to run out. We're not going to have him around for a whole lot longer, I imagine. And having another iteration of Curtis Blades on the come up is kind of where this feels like we are. So I'll go with Williams. All right. Featherweight, Yusuf Zalal and Jarno Errens. Ooh. If you're going to tune in early for one of these fights, I would actually recommend this one. Zalal had a rough stretch in the UFC, got cut. Won 3 in a row, then came back to the UFC and beat Billy Quarantillo. Actually, a really nice return for him. Overall, it was a solid performance. Jarno Erden's 14-5-1. 1-2 in the UFC. Had a tough couple of fights against William Gomez and then Seungwoo Choi. Rebounded, finally got his first UFC win when he beat Steve Wynn. It feels like they're kind of setting up Zalal here to have a good performance. Right? Well, he's a big favorite, jeez. Am I gonna buck that just because I can? I'm gonna respect the odds. I'll go with Zalal there, but if you don't mind losing your money, getting like 2.5 or 3-1 on Aaron's. Aaron's is no one to trifle with. Just put it like that. Then at strawweight, kicking everything off, we have Stephanie Luciano and Talita Alankar. Alankar, very decorated jiu-jitsu practitioner. Got a split decision win over Hayani Dos Santos. I remember that fight. That was a weird fight. Luciano is 5-1-1. Her nickname is Rondina, like Little Ronda. She's Brazilian, so 2-fight winning streak. This is her UFC debut. These two fought to a draw on the Contender Series, actually. And she's been trying to make her UFC debut ever since. That was about a year ago. She's had fights fall out with Shauna Bannon and Julia Pilastri. Odds on this one are close, but kind of favor Luciano. The layoff is a little bit... I'm actually going to buck the odds on this one. I'm going to go with Alankar. Not sure how good I feel about that one, but that's where we are. So, okay. That is our current card. So, Saturday, y'all know the drill. MMA Zone 411mania.com. I watch so UFC, so you don't have to. Yeah, come on by. Wish me luck. And, yeah, I always appreciate it. Okay. We've been going for a bit. We'll be very brief through the through the news. It's late. I'm tired. All right. So UFC 308. This will take place in Abu Dhabi, October 26th. And we have most of the card. We have like the main card revealed. We knew a few other fights, but now we have like the main card set. So the announced bouts prior to Dana White dropping a bunch of them yesterday. Danny Ige and Lerone Murphy, fine fight. Renat Fakhretdinov and Nursultan Rozboyev. Which of those two names do I feel like typing out? Probably Rozboyev. Kennedy Zachukwu and Marcos Rogerio de Lima, who cares? And Jeff Neal and Rafael dos Anjos. Okay. I don't hate that. That's a rematch, isn't it? Yeah, didn't RDA like run over him in his welterweight debut? Yeah, 2017, so it's been a bit. That wasn't his debut. His debut was against Tarek Safdie, and that was actually a really impressive win for RDA. Yeah, then he fought Neil Magny and just arm triangled him in 3.5 minutes, basically. No, that was Neil Magny, not Jeff Neal. Why did I confuse those two? And don't say, I know what you just thought. That's not why I confused them. They don't even fight the same. I don't know. Remember that one time when Neil Magny spent like 2 fights putting on the Haitian accent? No, that was random. No, so these two have not fought. Not a bad fight. But 4 fights for our main card, so there's room for one more, potentially room for one more. Goes like this. Your main event will be for the featherweight title. Ilia Topuria and Max Holloway. Yes, please. Hook that into my veins. One of the best fights you can make in the whole sport. Really good fight. Man, if Max pulls that off, that will be one of the most... that's one of the more impressive things you'll ever see in the sport. Like, Max is already an all-timer. I don't know exactly where all-time, but he's an all-time fighter already. If he regains that belt, especially from someone as good as Ilia Topuria, that's a big deal. I don't know that I like his chances to do that, but I done counting out Max Holloway for the foreseeable future. I may not pick him, but I am done discounting him. I mean, I shouldn't say I discounted him when he fought Gaethje, but I didn't. I gave way too much credence to some of the negatives, and Max Holloway is not at a point where the negatives should be given as much credence as I was giving them. So, really good fight. Can't complain one bit about that. Co-main event for 5 rounds. Robert Whittaker and Khamzat Chimaev, because we're somewhere where Chimaev is not sanctioned or unable to travel. I don't know that this fight's going to happen. It's because Chimaev is unreliable at this point. I said this for last time they were scheduled to fight. 5 rounds. 3 rounds, you'd have a better case for Chimaev. 5 rounds, it's a long time to fight Robert Whittaker. If you're not like... let's be very clear about the following. Robert Whittaker at middleweight has lost to exactly 2 people. The only guys at middleweight to beat him are Israel Adesanya, who stopped him once and then got a split decision in their second fight that you could have given to Whittaker, and Dricus du Plessis. So the best middleweight of this generation in Adesanya and the current champion in du Plessis. I don't know that Khamzat Chimaev is like that guy. Heavyweight, a rematch between Cyril Gane and Alexander Volkov. Okay, whatever. And at light heavyweight, presumably for the next title shot, Magomed Ankalaev and Alexander Rakic. I actually like Rakic's chances there. I've been a believer of his for a while. That knee injury when he fought Blachowicz the first time really, really derailed. Like, that fight was 1 round apiece when we went into the third when the injury happened, but that really did a number on his career trajectory. And Ankalaev, like, he's good, but that guy's real-time fight IQ has not been demonstrated to be top tier. It's only 3 rounds, though, so... Point being, that's a really good pay-per-view card. So, 2 5-round fights on there. They'll probably try to throw one more fight on the main card, because they don't like only 4-fight main cards, even with 2 5-rounder fights. So, we'll see, but thus far... Okay, the undercard... Neil and RDA is fine. Fakhretdinov and Ruzaboyev is not bad. I mean, the only one I'm poo-pooing here is the heavyweights. Is that Zechiku's heavyweight debut? Yes. Does he prefer Zechiku or does he prefer Zechukwu? I can never remember how he prefers it pronounced. I think he's been at light heavyweight. Yeah, this is his heavyweight debut. Okay. That makes it moderately more interesting. It's still the worst fight of the announced fights. Because Dan Ige and Lerone Murphy that's a big thumbs up. But 308, that's a really good pay-per-view card at the moment. As a minor note, UFC 307 got a couple of more fights announced. So here's what we know about 307 thus far. It's going to be in Salt Lake City. And bless Jose Aldo for coming back to elevation here and wanting to. He's fighting Mario Bautista here. I think I said this after because he lost that Marab fight here when the elevation got to both of them a little bit. Um, that was the card where um, Edwards got the welterweight belt by head kicking Usman in the fifth round. The reaction to that knockout was the loudest reaction of the night, but Jose Aldo coming out got the biggest walkout pop by a non-trivial margin. Like that dude got the respect he deserved, even though he's fairly far from home. So he's coming back here. Don't know why they booked that one for this card, but I don't know. Maybe he had a good time here. I don't know. But just, it's a little bit weird to put Aldo here. That's all I'm saying. And I'm not complaining. Like, if I wanted to make a thing of it, I could probably go up there and like um, find him doing a meet and greet or an autograph session or something. That's not outside the realm of possibility. But what we know for that card at the moment, so some of these are newer announcements, but we know Raquel Pennington and Juliana Pena, if they main event with that, they are asking for trouble. Like that won't get booed out of the building. That'll get everyone leaving before it happens. Movsar Evloev and Aljamain Sterling. That's a big step up for Evloev. Well, it's a good. Sorry, I should rephrase. That's a step up for Sterling at featherweight in terms of his featherweight opposition, and that's the biggest name Evloev's fought yet. Because Evloev, he's got good wins on his resume, and frankly, I like his chances, but we'll see. Marina Rodriguez and Yasmin Lucindo is whatever. Cesar Almeida and Ihor Potieria. Potieria should lose that. Chris Curtis and Kevin Holland is a really good fight. So be on the lookout for that one. I already mentioned Jose Aldo and Mario Bautista. Carla Esparza going to hang him up. This is her last fight. She'll be fighting Tisha Pennington, and no one will care. Then Kayla Harrison braving altitude. I shouldn't say that like dismissively. Why are we wasting Kayla Harrison's bantamweight fights on this? Because she doesn't have a lot of those weight cuts in her, guys. I mean, for crying out loud, like her gold medal wins are at like what, 170 pounds? I forget exactly what it is, but it was something like that, like, or at least one of them was. So when she's not like cutting weight, that woman is yoked. She's fighting Ketlin Vieira, so gonna see who gasses for who's like not gonna be acclimated to the elevation. But we're wasting. Okay, you know why that fight's there? That fight's on this card in case something happens to either Pennington or Pena, and Kayla Harrison can slot in to fight. If something happens to Pennington, they'll just strip the belt because nobody cares. Harrison is here basically to serve as backup for the main for the not the main event, please not the main event for that title fight. And if nothing happens to Pennington and Pena, she's here to presumably run somebody over on the same card as that weight class title is defended, and then like really line up the schedules there for that. So dude, Kayla Harrison's gonna if she fights for that belt, she's gonna wear that belt. She's just so much better than. Watching her like crush Holly Holm was something, because Holly's not a small woman for that weight class, and Holly is. Holly's been a roadblock for a lot of people that have been more or less in the position that Harrison has been put in. Watching her with elbows, like, oh, good grief, that woman. Because the PFL for the longest time, like, she couldn't use elbow strikes. Then she had one Invicta fight, and she left that mat looked like a crime scene when she was done with that woman. Just carved her up. Then watching her just smash, dude, she bludgeoned that poor woman. Yeah, she beat up Holly Holm pretty badly. So we'll see. Ketlin Vieira's not a scrub, but women's bantamweight is just such a crap division that who knows. Okay, was there anything else announced this last week? UFC on ESPN, I think UFC Plus 102. This is October 12th. That got fleshed a little bit. Brad Tavares and Jun Young Park got rescheduled for that one. That's an okay fight. Brandon Royval and Tatsuto Taira are on this card as well. Expected the main event. That's a really good fight, actually. Cody Garbrandt's desperately trying to salvage his career. Heavyweights, Chris Barnett and Waldo Cortez Acosta. That is a weird fight. Not necessarily weird in the good way. Okay, what else? I mentioned 307. We know, okay, the French card, I don't think I've talked a lot about it. They announced, we already knew about Renato Moicano and Benoit Saint-Denis, which, yes, please. Imavov and Allen also for that card. Okay. Yeah, we've talked a little bit about that one before. We know enough about 306. Still waiting on some updates for UFC on ESPN 62. That's August 24th. We are just missing a lot of fights for that card in particular. We have a few. We have Edmund Shabazian and Gerald Mershart. Jose Medina, Zachary Reese, Vyacheslav Borshov, and James Yontop. A couple of TBDs. Bruno Ferreira is supposed to be on that card. Doesn't have an opponent yet. Yeah, that card looks crappy. We were supposed to get Ferreira was supposed to fight Roman Kopylov. That's a good that would have been a perfectly serviceable fight. Fortunately, Kopylov wound up withdrawing. That's unfortunate. Yeah, that card needs help. Like one of these is a TBD, and it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So there's like what 3 more fights at a minimum that have to go on there, and one of them has to be main event worthy, which it's Apex slop, so that's a low bar. But even by Apex slop standards, we don't have a main event worthy fight on that card yet. Okay, that's really all I've got for upcoming cards. Give me just a minute. We got to talk about the antitrust lawsuit because a little bit more came out. So the UFC tried to throw one more settlement at this whole thing, and that was again denied. The judge it's pretty clear at this point the judge thinks that the UFC is an unfair monopoly. So, and the UFC is not going to go through with a settlement that voluntarily breaks up their monopoly. So this looks more and more like it's going to trial. And apparently it's going to be a jury trial. So I mentioned before a lot of antitrust stuff. Like this kind of antitrust stuff, they don't always go with jury trials. But at this point, a bench trial would be... if you represent the UFC, you do not advocate for the bench trial at this point. Because you kind of know where the judge is coming from, and it's not favorable to your position. Which is, for anyone wondering, like, well, then why do we have bench trials at all? Being able to make legitimate rulings on motions and whatnot, and then still be impartial for the purposes of the actual trial is... it's well within the capability of judges. But this one, it looks like it's going jury, which... I'm not saying the system of trial by jury is bad. I am saying that if you look at jury selection process, the people who get selected for juries are, that's weird. It's never the best and brightest. Because one side or the other doesn't want the best and brightest there. And that can just make that complicated. But the other, I mentioned before, like the other big thing that the judge seemed to object to was the joining together of the 2 different lawsuits as part of the settlement. So the Lee component of this, which we is a specific time period, that is they set like a trial date for October. So that might be coming up very shortly. So imagine, so if we do go jury trial, unless something changes there, so jury selection process would begin in the relatively near future, and then the Johnson trial, the Johnson component of this, the Johnson suit, is just going to continue proceeding as it was, separate from the Lee case. So there's still like discovery and some other stuff to go through over there. And then, of course, there's a decent chance that whatever the verdict is and whatever the ruling is in particular, as it pertains to the Lee case, will have a serious impact on the jurisprudence and the legal positioning and arguments relative to what the Johnson case would be putting forward. So. But yeah, they tried again and got one more settlement rejected, and that is looking very much like trial is um, inevitable. That doesn't mean we'll get a jury verdict, but at this point, some amount of trial and legal arguments before a jury seems like it's going to happen. You can still do some kind of a settlement. You can settle anytime up to the verdict. So anytime before the verdict is read, you can still announce a settlement. The judge still has to sign off on it, but that can all happen any point until the verdict is read by the jury. I mean, it's rendered by the jury. So we might still get a settlement out of this, but at this point, I would like the odds on this actually like getting to part of a trial very high. Seems very high. I mean, you can tell that the UFC is getting a little desperate because they've started the stupid smear campaign. So Dana White coming out and being like, "Yeah, this guy was at our high school, and I don't know what me and Lorenzo or whatnot did to him, but it feels like he's got an axe to grind." This is utter crap, by the way. I mean, not it's not a lie. Let me rephrase. So the judge in this case, first of all, he's been overseeing this case for almost 10 years at this point. Like, that thing was filed a while ago. I mean, 10 years might be a bit of a stretch. But 6? I it the time period was like 14 to 16, right? It was somewhere in 14 to somewhere in 16, so like 8 years, give or take. So I'd have to double check the specific numbers on that. If you had an issue with this judge, point being, if you were concerned about some kind of conflict of interest, um, you had a lot of years to register that complaint. And now you're trying to air that publicly because your stock tanked? It did, by the way. when that plea deal was a plea's the wrong term. Plea bargains come out of criminal court, not civil. But when those settlement terms were rejected, the TKO stock just down, 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 down. Because this is like one of the few things that can threaten their monopoly and their position. So, and I mean, we all know that like even if there's a verdict handed down against the UFC, there's still going to be some appeals. There's at least two layers of appeals that they would be entitled to going from federal circuit, because they're in federal court. It's not state. This is a federal circuit. Um, there would be the Circuit Court of Appeals, and then in theory the Supreme Court. So there's at least two layers, somewhat pursuant to how it goes. The appellant process is a whole thing, and you can only really like calculate out for it after you've heard specific arguments and rulings. So we'll see. But yeah, they've started addressing it somewhat publicly. And by the way, for any of you guys that might be going, well, wait, they went to the same high school. Yeah, they had like 1 year overlap. The judge was like 2 years older than Dana and Lorenzo, and by all accounts, wildly different social circles. So if this was a complaint you wanted to register, you should have done so 4 or 5 years ago, not now on the verge of trial. Is really the long and the short of that. This basically amounts to mudslinging, and it's not beneath the UFC and Dana White, but it is pathetic. So yeah. All right. That is what I've got for the news. So let me check Twitter/X, and we will see what's going on over there. And if there's nothing new, we'll do plugs and get out of here. Nothing new there. So plugs. Last week I was a busy beaver. Um, Two podcasts. There was a review for Deadpool and Wolverine. Then there was a TV party tonight for The Boys season 4. Then Thursday I was off. Friday I had then Wednesday I had Dynamite. Thursday I was off. Friday I had SmackDown. Saturday I had UFC on ABC 7. An hour and a half later, give or take, there was WWE SummerSlam. The movies and television reviews are up on the Red Ocean Broadcasting Network /W2M Network. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you'll be able to find us over there. If you want my thoughts on movies and television, then in the wrestling and MMA zones of 411mania.com, you can find my other written coverage, so give those a read if you are so inclined. This week, I actually get to take most of it off. There is no Damn You Hollywood. There's not really a wide release movie, so none of that. I'm not currently scheduled for anything other than the regular stuff, so that's WWE SmackDown on Friday. I'll double check and make sure they don't need me for anything tomorrow, but that's SmackDown on Friday, and then the UFC event on Saturday. Then back here to review that, and I think we're previewing UFC 305. Yes, we are. Israel Adesanya and Dracus du Plessis in your main event there for the middleweight title. Need to watch some tape on those guys. Then flyweights, it's a good card actually. Flyweight, Kai Kara France and Steve Erceg is good. Gamrot and Hooker is good. Tuivasa and Rosenstruck sucks. Li Jingliang getting Li Jingliang and Carlos Pratas is okay. You got to round out the main card somehow. He could do worse. What was on that card? Jack Jenkins and Herbert Burns actually is pretty good. Josh Kulabau and Ricardo Ramos. That's a maybe. That's a big maybe, but main card is pretty solid. The rest, there's a pretty steep drop off after that, but full preview next week. So come on back for that. All right, that's it for me, everybody. Thank you for listening again. It is getting crazy out there, and I invite you to stay safe, please. I don't mean to be a pushover, but try not to do anything stupid. I'm certainly trying not to do anything stupid these days, so just stay safe out there if you would. I'll see you next week then. Please continue to be well, be safe, and behave.